Hey friends, let's talk about nutrient density and homesteading mindsets and the perfect food that brings them together. Friends, welcome back to Hardscape's Urban Homestead, where we're growing gardens and whole food communities to help us live lives that help us to remember ourselves, each other, the natural world, and to help deepen and repair our relationship with the land that we live on. My name is Michaela, and I am urban homesteading on the land of the Nisan and Maidu people in the Sacramento Valley, also known as Davis, California. And I wanted to just sit down with you in this week right before the spring equinox, as the land is coming back to life and the gardens are springing back to life, and that hustle and bustle is starting to increase. I wanted to just pause for a sec, invite you into the kitchen, because I'm doing a task today that is actually a quite continuous part of my homesteading rhythm, and that I think really beautifully demonstrates a couple of the homesteading mindsets that we've talked about in other videos. Put the playlist down below. And that gives us an example of incredible nutrient density. So beginning with nutrient density, I really started focusing a lot on that particular aspect of nutrition, that particular aspect of whole foods cooking, when I was doing an AIP diet. The autoimmune protocol diet is a way of eating that is intended to be done for a limited period of time that eliminates all things that could potentially cause inflammation in the body to help to kind of target certain things that might be causing problems in the body. And so I was working on addressing some gut health issues. And so I went through that process for about 2 months. And it's a really powerful and effective process for healing gut health issues and for helping to identify some of the targets for an individual person of what might be causing those issues. So if you have any interest in that, you can drop some comments down below, and maybe I'll talk about it a little bit further on another video. But during that time, increasing nutrient density is incredibly important, because one of the things that your body is experiencing when you're having gut issues is an inability to absorb nutrients. And oftentimes it's caused by eating foods that either are low nutrient density or that, for whatever reason, your particular body are not able to absorb. So part of that healing process is really increasing your nutrient density. And I got very bad news in this area during this time, because the single most nutrient dense food that humans can eat is organ meat. And, I'm talking livers, hearts, stomachs, intestines, brains, tongue, just all the things that, speaking for myself, I was not raised eating, did not have a taste for, did not know how to cook, and just generally never considered as part of a well-rounded diet. But of course, in many parts of the world, including right here, this is part of the full spectrum of not only accessing all of the nutrients that animal food has to offer, but utilizing all parts of the animal as a way to, of course, increase its value and efficiency, but also to honor that the fullness of that life, which is a value that I very much hold. And so I really wanted to step into the ability to do this. But let me tell you, as far as I got was being able to put a couple tablespoons of liver in like a giant vat of chili. That's as far as I go. Although I do have a frozen beef heart in the freezer that I'm working up the courage to dealing with. I'll let you know how that goes. But the one shining piece of good news inside of that discussion was that the other thing that is considered organ meat is bones. And boy, howdy, do I go through some bone broth. Bone broth is one of those things that is used quite a bit in from scratch cooking, and certainly can be purchased at the store for quite a lot of money, but can also be made at home to a specificity that you particularly like, with higher nutrient density than what you can typically purchase at the store, and for practically no money. It can literally be done with scraps, or by purchasing inexpensive veggies and other inputs. And so it's one of the kind of homesteading processes that I jumped on right away when I started thinking about what it would mean to have a from scratch cooking culture here in my home. So we'll just press pause here and take a look at the batch I have going right now. So we have got in this pot, this slow cooker, a batch of chicken bone broth is in its second of 3 days cooking and just bubbling away as it should, extracting all that goodness from the leftovers of 2 chickens that were a delicious dinner in the recent past. So I'm going to talk a bit about the recipe that I use and the method that I use for making it in a sec, but I wanted to circle back to the idea of the values that are the foundation of a homesteading lifestyle. I've talked in a series of videos where I go through each of the values that I include in this list, talking about examples of how they show up in our life. But the general idea being that homesteading, could be thought of as a particular sort of infrastructure, living out in the country on a certain amount of land with, pastures and, outbuildings and raising large animals and, raising all of the food that you can. And that is certainly one wonderful form of homesteading. But if we broaden our definition of what homesteading means, firstly, we include a lot more people. We create a much longer and softer on-ramp for people to even get involved in this lifestyle to begin with. And we make it a more robust lifestyle that includes, issues of sustainability and health that everybody should have access to, whether or not they live in the country. And so rather than thinking about homesteading as a particular set of infrastructure, we think about it as a certain set of values and mindsets that you can cultivate wherever you are, whether you're in an apartment in the city or out on land somewhere or in the semi-suburbs like I am here. And 2 of those values are resourcefulness, right? Being resourceful in how we meet our needs, and valuing and centering a from scratch whole food cooking culture in your household. And so in the making of bone broth, we see both of those really clearly at play. This incredibly humble and ancient practice. Because basically what you have is a way to take the scraps from other cooking and continue cooking them down in this way that creates this incredibly nutrient-dense, delicious, and wildly versatile cooking product that, again, if you cook from scratch, you use it constantly, including as a lovely sipping beverage, especially when you're feeling under the weather. Nice mug of broth in the morning when you're not feeling well. It's just so good. So this is true whether you're making just a veggie-based broth or a bone broth of some sort. For me, it's always a combination. I like my broth like rich and thick and full of flavor. If I'm using broth in a recipe, I want it to bring a nice bold flavor to that recipe. I want it to kind of bring all of the, all of the flavor and the herbs and so on to the party, so that that's just less that I have to add in the moment. Some people prefer their broth to be more simple, even just using bone and nothing else. I do not prefer that. I want all of the things in there. And so you see the resourcefulness because you're basically using, the bones and skin and fat and whatever else is left over from cooking meat. So chicken, turkey, pork. My best friend is a farmer. She raises pastured pork. So I have abundant access to really good quality like pork chops and so on. So I always just save the bone that's in there. And of course you can use beef bones and any other bones that you are using. You can purchase those bones from a butcher, or some grocery stores will have, stew bones available, but they're crazy expensive to just buy literally just the bones to make stock. And so by simply saving all of those pieces in the freezer until you have enough to work with, you're using the scraps from previous meals. You are being resourceful in that you are, utilizing every piece that you can, which both honors the life of the animal and, stretches your grocery budget a little bit more. So in this case, I had 2 chickens that were from chickens that I actually raised. I raise meat birds a couple of times a year with my friend on her farm. And so saving up the spare from that. And then on the side of veggies, I'm also saving in the freezer veggie scraps, like it's just part of my normal habit when I'm cooking. When I pull the skins off of onions or cut off the butt end or the butt end of the carrot or the celery, all of that goes into a Ziploc bag in the freezer. So I usually end up with, by the time I have enough bones to use, I've usually got a couple of gallon Ziploc bags with all kinds of veggie scraps. You can use a wide range of veggie scraps. There are some things that don't work well. So any cruciferous vegetables like broccoli or kale or cauliflower, those tend to bring a little bit of a pungent flavor and aroma that is not always pleasant. So I don't use those. But any of your alliums, of course, onions and garlic, you want to have plenty of those. Carrots and celery. Fennel is really lovely to add. And so on. I'm going to give you a list of the kind of full range in a moment, but using as many scraps as I can. I usually do end up also adding in some onions, whole onions, whole heads of garlic, in addition to whatever I've saved in the freezer. But even then, I'll use, for example, I have a couple of onions that are going sprouty on me, so those are perfect for tossing in the stock. I've got the last of last year's garlic, and it's starting to get a little soft and, not great for fresh cooking. So that'll go in the stock. So it's just a great way to use up veggies that are a little past their prime, that are not yet spoiled, but are not great for fresh eating anymore. So all of that can go into the stock pot with a little bit of salt, with some herbs, and that boils down. The way that I usually do it is for 3 days. So I use a roasting oven, as we just looked at a moment ago, rather than pots on the stove, partly to just keep it off the stove so it's not in the way. It's a giant stock pot. But also because the way to extract the most flavor and nutrition from the bones is to let them go a good 2 to 3 days in a kind of high simmer, not quite a boil, like just under a boil. So we are on day 2 of boiling down these chickens. And on day 3, which will be tomorrow morning, I'll add all of the veggies and let it go another 24 hours. You can do it for less than that. You can do a single day broth. I wouldn't do much less than that. You want, a good 6 hours or so on the bones at least. But if you have the time and you have a roasting oven, it's a good way to do it to get the most out of it. You don't want to add the veggies on the front end because they can go a little bit funky. The flavor can get thrown off a bit. So I just put them in that last day. Okay, so yeah, I think that's the basics. As I said, I love using all of the things for a really rich, complexly flavored broth. And so I use as the basis of my broth a recipe from this book, The Longevity Kitchen by Rebecca Katz. She does wonderful cookbooks that are really focused on nutrient density, food as medicine. She has another one that's specifically focused on cancer fighting recipes and on flavor, on big flavor with big health benefits. So in this book, she repeats a recipe that and kind of updates a recipe that she's shared in previous books called her Magic Mineral Broth. And that has a vegetarian version and the bone broth version. So I'm just going to read you the list of things that can go into your stock. But of course, one of the lovely things, it's so versatile. You don't have to put all of these things. You can put any or all of these things and be just fine. But for your maximum magic mineral broth goodness, here's what Katz recommends that you use. 1 fennel bulb, the tops and the bulb, 2 unpeeled onions, 6 unpeeled carrots. Basically everything is going to be unpeeled because there's quite a bit of nutrients in the peels of things. Keep that in mind when you're peeling your potatoes. If you can stand to leave them whole, leave them whole. 1 leek, a bunch of celery, 2 unpeeled sweet potatoes, 1 unpeeled garnet yam, 1 bunch of fresh flat leaf parsley, 6 sprigs of fresh thyme, 12 large garlic cloves unpeeled, 1/3 piece of fresh ginger, 1 strip of kombu or any other seaweed, a handful of black peppercorns, some juniper berries or allspice, 2 bay leaves, a tablespoon of vinegar or freshly squeezed lemon juice. I usually put both, and a bunch of water, enough water to cover that all up. And so, again, utilizing the, and the chicken. Forgot that part. And your chicken carcasses. So in this 22-quart roaster oven, I do a minimum of 2 chickens or a single turkey, or, a turkey plus whatever random, and then whatever other random bones I've kept. Get it going for a little while. And then to preserve it, I do, when I can get up the effort to do it, I will pressure can usually in some quarts and some pints. I like to have a bunch on the shelf just ready to open without having to thaw. And then, of course, it can be frozen. The downside there, it takes up space in the freezer. And, of course, you have to thaw it before you can use it. So you have to do a little bit of prep there. Usually I do a little bit of both thing. Right now, my freezers are pretty full. So I think this batch is going to have to get canned. And then you just have them on the shelf. You can pop it open. My older daughter has really awakened to home cooking. It's so delightful to see. She's 25 and she's, pretty much lived her whole adult life so far, having Uber Eats as her culinary choice. And she's finally just really awakened to the pleasure and the cost-saving benefits of cooking from scratch, and discovered how delicious it is to cook rice in her mother's homemade broth. And so she's been going through it. So I gotta up my production because I never want to be out of it. In my next video, I think I'm going to do a pantry tour just to kind of show you what it looks like to have a very modest sized Whole Foods pantry in a kind of urban setting, in a house that was not equipped for this kind of lifestyle. There's no root cellar, there's no large pantry space. So how do you, firstly make the most of space, and how do you prioritize what you keep on hand, and just kind of ideas for what sorts of bulk foods you might want to keep on hand, what it looks like to preserve your own food and keep it on the shelf. So we will do that, and you'll notice a very large section of that pantry shelf dedicated to the bone broth, because star of the show. So that's it for me today. I'd love to know your recipes, your favorite thing to do with broth. If you have tried making homemade broth, if you've ever canned homemade broth, just let me know what your love affair with homemade broth is like, and I will see you in the next video. So until then, I hope you are deeply provisioned for your culinary journeys, and until next time, I love you. Goodbye.